Social media and platforms like X that ask us to form opinions very, very quickly and to like them and to always be fast and fast. Perhaps logic can be a kind of antidote, not because it will make you more reasonable and rational, but just because it will slow you down. Just take time to think it through.
Welcome to the Research and Reason podcast. Join us as we discuss the latest research, news, and opinion from arts academics at the University of Auckland.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Julianne Evans toku ingoa. I'm Julianne Evans, the Media Advisor for the Faculty of Arts, and today my guest is Dr. Patrick Girard, a Senior Lecturer in Philosophy, who has just published a fascinating book, Logic in the Wild, published by McGill University Press in Canada. Tēnā koe, Patrick.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you for coming in.
My
I really like the title of this book. How did that come about?
That was a bit of a struggle to find a good short title that had only a few words and the word logic in it. I think the idea is to convey the essence of the book, which is to make logic accessible and take it out of the academia and bring it back to the wild in general. And what I mean is just to give it back to people so that they can use it in their everyday life in the wild.
And so it doesn't sit away from them somewhere where they feel like it's not connected to them?
Absolutely,
is that it?
yes.
Yeah.
Or a discipline that is reserved for specialists like me that love formalisms and mathematics at the university.
Yeah, so logic is something that seems like a good idea for decision-making, and you make that point in the book, rather than immediately panicking and thinking of the first thing that comes into your mind. It might pay to think it through.
Absolutely.
Can you give us an example of good decision-making relating to logic that you might have mentioned in the book?
It's a bit difficult to find concrete examples because when I say that it's useful for decision-making, it's not useful into giving you decisions and telling you what you should choose, but it's useful into slowing down your thinking and relating it to other decisions you might have made in other contexts. And sometimes the content of the decisions we have to make makes us passionate or confuses us just because of the involvement we have with the ideas. But if we can isolate the patterns and relate them to other things for which we're not so passionate about, then it helps us slowing down and figuring out how to make decisions that are more coherent.
Do you find that there are people who just think, I'm not a logical person. I've always been told, for example, that I'm not very good at maths, whereas I might be good at creative writing or creative thinking that involves imagination. Do you see those two things as mutually exclusive, or are they not? Is it a false dichotomy?
I certainly have heard that a lot from people, and I find it quite unfortunate indeed. I claim myself to be both a creative and a logical person, and I do think that logic is very much complementary to creative endeavors, or perhaps like the sometimes you hear the rational and the emotional brain divide, but both work together. And there's no way in which logic does not assist creative thinking. And in the same way as well, logic requires a lot of creative thinking into figuring out patterns and different situations. It does expand the mind. Once you really engage with logical thinking, you require the creative thinking. And I do think that a lot of creative people tend to seek coherence in their work, in their stories, in their whatever that they're doing. There's a message, there's coherence in what they're doing in their practices, and that is very much related to logical thinking.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of a novelist or anyone writing anything, it has to make sense. It has to have very often a beginning and an end. It has to have some logical processes in terms of characters and what they do.
Yes.
All of those things. Yeah, that's right. So that doesn't bear scrutiny, that division, does it?
Yeah.
You make the point as well in the book, or you ask the question, is Sherlock Holmes actually good at logic? And I guess most of us would think, yes, that's his job. He's a logical thinker. What's your conclusion in the book? Give us a sneak preview.
He wouldn't be really good in my introduction to logic courses. When he talks about deduction, we talk about abduction, which is another technical word, but he kind of does his reasoning the wrong way around for logician. What he's really good at is what we call inference to the best explanation. So you have a situation, in his case, it's evidence on a crime scene, and you need to understand what happened, and you need to explain what happened, and you have limited information, and you need to come up with the most reasonable scenario. And that's where, indeed, his creative mind is fascinating, and it's exploited in the storytelling and everything. And it is a way of thinking, certainly, and seeking coherence, but it sort of goes in the opposite of what deductive reasoning is. When he talks about deduction, he means bringing out new information to understand what happened. When logicians like me talk about deduction, it's only unpacking information that is already contained in first principles.
What would an example of that be? Could you relate it to a crime scene or something like that to give anybody an idea of what the difference is?
To a crime scene, no. I do think Sherlock Holmes still is a good role model, but not for deductive reasoning. For deductive reasoning, the go-to example is the kind of reasoning that we adopt, that we learn in school when we do standard geometries. We have very simple principles that tell us how to manipulate lines and points and angles, and then with that we can play with them together and then show things about triangles and squares and circles. Same kind of thing in science when they have first principles that tell us some irregularities in nature. Then from those general laws we can infer and unpack information that allow us to make predictions.
So we already know something, and then we look further at what else might be the case, whereas Sherlock Holmes is coming fresh to something, isn't he, and going, I don't know anything about this. I've got nothing to base this on, but I'm going to have a look and see what's here.
Something like that,
something
yes.
Like that?
Yeah. He's uncovering new information, whereas we're unpacking information that is already contained in the first principles.
So one of the things you also say in the book is that, in a contentious world where everybody is very keen to disagree with each other and be quite polarizing in their views.
Yes.
It's probably always been the case, but it seems quite a lot to be the case now.
Yes.
In all parts of the world, you see those sort of rises of culture wars and so on.
In the social media,
social media particularly, yes. And I'm thinking of America, but of course it can be in England. It's everywhere, really.
It's true here in New Zealand.
It's here in New Zealand
Absolutely.
Right now, in
Absolutely.
fact. How can logic help us as people with different opinions to connect?
I think what logic is good at is to provide a what I call a neutral space of dialectical inquiry. And that's a bit of a mouthful. What I mean by that is an inquiry is when we have a common goal to seek truth or to make decision. Dialectic is when we have various perspectives on the topic that's at discussion. You can think of various people talking about the same thing, and they each have their own perspective. And neutrality is where logic kicks in. And it's to think of coherence as opposed to ideas. So instead of announcing our strong opinions and debating the strong opinions, we can uphold our opinions and seek coherence. So instead of challenging you on what you believe, I can work with you constructively into understanding what follows from the beliefs that you might have. And we can try together to find common grounds that is independent from our different opinions. So it's a way to seek neutrality so as to find agreement in between.
That sounds like an ideal scenario.
Isn't it?
How often does it happen, though? I'm trying to
Really?
think of our parliament. I can't really imagine it, but is it common?
It seldom happens. I mean, I've
Yeah.
tried on my own engaging with activist groups in my neighborhood. I don't know if you've heard of them, the Occupy Garnet Road was a group that were very active against the construction of cycle lanes in Greyland. And
This is in Auckland for
This is in
listeners
Auckland, yes.
who don't know where we are at the moment. Yeah, Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Yeah.
Yes, and it was in my neighborhood, and they also were against the felling down of trees in the park and in the community. And in general, yes, I agree with a few of their ideas, but the way they presented the whole thing was so weird and chaotic that I couldn't appreciate the coherence in their views. And that's when I started thinking, well, let me try. And no,
And did you? Could you?
I didn't win anything. They stopped the cycle lanes, unfortunately, but that's okay. I mean, one step at a time.
Yeah.
One step at a time, one student at a time,
One situation.
I control what I can, and perhaps like one purpose for me in writing this book was to give people a tool that was more accessible and to trying to find ways to better communicate.
And so bringing me around to that, is this book for everyone, really? I mean, or does it have a particular audience in mind?
I want it to be for everyone, but I don't know that everyone likes to read nonfiction books. So the way I describe it is like for intellectual but non-academic people, the kind of people that like to read popular science. I think scientists are very good at popularizing their discipline in general. Even Albert Einstein wrote a bunch of popular books, popularization perhaps, of science, and people like Stephen Hawking. And we have prominent figures from science that talk to the general public. That's not so true for philosophy in general, let alone in logic. And that's something I'm trying to do here, indeed. So it's that kind of literature that I'm trying to write here.
Well, there must be books on popular philosophy, but I can't think immediately what they are. But I can think of lots of popular science.
There are some in logic as well, but there's this tendency in the 20th century for logicians to put a strong emphasis on symbolisms and formalisms. So you have like a short introduction, and immediately on page 3 you have a lot of symbols.
And that puts people off.
I love my symbols, but I understand that people don't. So my whole book has no equation, which is funny because
no maths.
No maths at all.
Oh,
I mean,
my goodness, well, some of us are relieved.
Yes, the publishers will ask you to list the equations when you publish a book, and I thought I had no equations, but my copy editor came back to say that I used 2 + 2 = 4.
Oh, okay. But I think most of us can probably grasp that.
I hope so.
So you're okay. You talk about slow thinking, or other people have spoken about that as well, as a kind of real key to thinking logically. Because everybody knows what it's like to suddenly make a decision based on passion or fear or
mental
panic
reflexes and biases,
or freeze or just your first response to something.
Yeah, which is important. It's an important aspect of life, right? We need to be able to make quick decisions.
Sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But ideally, in a logical framework, you were talking not only just about slow thinking, but even a sort of a third stage, an even slower level of thinking. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so it's Daniel Kahneman that had this theory of a system 1 and a system 2, where the system 1 is this sort of immediate mental reflex, and the system 2 is the more thought-through process of thinking. I think like logic can go even slower, because sometimes in the system 2, we do some decisions that involve, say, mathematics, and or logic, or some kind of or any kind of patterns of reasoning that is slightly more complex, that requires a system 2, but that system 2 can still make mistakes. That I suggest we need a system 3, which really is where logic operates, that really allows us to slow down, think it through. Logicians, I mean, some are quick because they're very good at it, but I do think that logic becomes useful anyway when we really sit down and take time and evaluate it, and it will challenge you in your beliefs, because when you identify patterns that feel very automatic and sensible, they may actually lead you astray, and it takes a certain kind of courage and humility to first identify it and then
think beyond it almost.
Exactly.
Yeah. It sounds like we're going to be doing a lot of quiet thinking in your process.
Yeah,
is that true? Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I mean
we're talking minutes,
media,
hours.
Yes, social media and platforms like X that ask us to form opinions very, very quickly and to like them and to always be fast and fast. Perhaps logic can be a kind of antidote, not because it will make you more reasonable or rational, but just because it will slow you down. Just take time to think it through. That's very important.
Because we're very connected to immediate gratification, aren't we?
Absolutely.
We want something up really quickly. We want someone to like it. We want lots of people to like it.
And we're required to give information and opinions and very quickly in that fast pace as well, right?
Yeah. But I guess we're going to get faster at it if we do this logical process of thinking more often.
True.
It will, as you say, become faster.
I believe so. Sometimes on the spot, it's a little slower thinking, but you save time overall. Because,
Eventually.
yeah,
Hopefully make better decisions in your life, which
I
make
hope
you
so.
happier.
I hope so, yes.
Yeah. And one thing I was interested in that you were talking about before this interview, actually, is that we might assume by this conversation that you will always come to the best decision by thinking logically, and the best one maybe for you, maybe for your community, maybe for the world, one might imagine, if you're thinking, logically about it. But that's not always the case, is it? Logic and best, or logic and the truth, are not always connected. Is that right?
They're sometimes quite different indeed. There's a concrete case that historically Albert Einstein came to write a letter to President Roosevelt advising him to initiate research on atomic energy, because he was afraid that the Nazis would get their hand on very great powers and build bombs that would settle the war in very dramatic kind of ways. And he was sort of cornered into a situation with limited information about what was going on in Germany and the rest of the world. He was cornered into trying to decide whether or not to write to Roosevelt. And he chose accordingly, out of basically the fear that the Nazis would end up with the bomb, and advised Roosevelt to start the research. And then that unfolded in what you can see, for instance, in the movie from last year with Oppenheimer, and the creation of the atomic bomb and the use of it on civilians. And it's something that Einstein came to regret. He said it was one of his biggest mistakes in his life. And I don't think that he did anything logically wrong. His decision making was
sound.
Was sound, was considered, was slow thinking, and he thought it through. And I think he did the best he could do, and
with what he had, with the information he had.
And that's okay, but it doesn't always lead us to truth or to the best decisions. Indeed, like, we can make mistakes. Logic is not what will tell you what to do. It's not the thing that will tell you what is true or false, but it will guide you into finding at least coherence in your reasoning, such that when you come back with your hindsight vision, you will be realized to at least notice or appreciate that you did the best with what you were given.
So at least if you've gone through your decision making and you've considered all your options and you come to a conclusion that you later regret, I suppose you can at least, in the case of someone like Einstein, I don't know how you would get over that terrible feeling that you had done the wrong thing. But most of us are not in control of nuclear proliferation, are we? So we mostly don't have those kinds of consequences. But your point is, I think, that logic is neutral in its morality. It's not one thing or the other. It's just a process. It's not right or wrong. It's a process of thinking.
Yeah, and in hindsight, when you have more information, you might realize where you went wrong, but you will have done it in ways that you can own, and that will make you feel authentic.
Yeah. It's great. Well, I'm very happy to have spoken to you about this. Just for the benefit of people who might have started listening about 20 minutes ago, can you tell us again the name of the book, where it's published, where we can find it, and any other final thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, well, my final thought is that I most appreciate that you took the time to come and talk to me about logic. I think it can be a topic that is off-putting when you first hear it, but I think if you take the time to discuss it, you'll see that it is interesting, and I am passionate about it, and that's why I wrote the book, and I think it's a fun read. It's published by McGill Queen's University Press. You can find it online, directly on the University Press websites, but also on Amazon and all kinds of platforms. So you just need to search for Logic in the Wild. And I would most appreciate if you bought an order, and if you would even comment on it and give me some feedback.
Say something interesting and nice about it. And you also write a blog, don't you?
I do write a blog.
Would people find that illuminating, do you think?
It's meant to be accessible. It is a daily writing routine I have. So it's my thoughts of the day that I just write down, and I blog them, and you're most welcome to come and comment on it and see what it's like. You'll see what it's like to have someone like me, a logician, reflecting on a daily basis and trying to develop new topics. You'll find it on the website whose title is the same as the book, so it's logicinthewild.com.
And you teach a course in philosophy as well, don't you? Or multiple courses.
Yes.
And here at the University of Auckland.
Here at the University of Auckland, we have an introduction to logic. We teach critical thinking, and we have a whole logic and computation major here that you can take with us.
Great. Thank you so much for coming in, Patrick. It's been my pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much. I most appreciated it. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Research and Reason podcast. Stay up to date with the Faculty of Arts by following us on social media.